Let's go over the 2021 FRQ number 1 from set 1. So there were several versions of our paper test this year. These are from the paper test. Two of the sets of FRQs were released 2 days after the exam, and now we have some student samples. This is a draft. Also, please read the disclaimer that you can't post the student samples anywhere. They can really only be used for training purposes for AP Summer Institutes. At some point, they usually do release student samples so you can use them with your students to help them write better FRQs, but at this point, you cannot share these documents. So take a minute and read FRQ number 1. So pause the video, read through the FRQ. It's 2 pages long. And then take a look at the scoring guidelines. So these are the scoring guidelines for the FRQ. They continue on. And then the next page that you have is student sample 1D, and I gave you 1F. So we're going to practice scoring 2 from this FRQ. When you're done, and I recommend that when a student gets an answer right, that you highlight the words that make the answer correct. When you're done, unpause the video and see if you got it right. So let's go over the answers here for FRQ number 1. This student wrote, the independent variable in this experiment is the compass direction that the panels faced. And so that is correct. Now this highlighter method can be effective if you have students self-grade. Sometimes I do that, maybe like once a year, I'll hand back their written FRQs to that person and say, pull out a highlighter, put away everything else, and then they self-grade. And they can't imply, if it's not written, they don't get the points. If it sounds good, but it's not on the scoring guidelines, it doesn't get the points. You have to physically write the words to get the points. And so the highlighter method is helpful so students can see, oh, I actually didn't write it. I meant it, but I didn't write it. So it helps them. You can also grade on your own without self-grading or having the students self-grade first, and you can use the highlighter method that way. It also helps students, especially if you teach freshmen, to not write a whole book, because it's only part of, it's only certain words that give you the credit. So freshmen especially tend to write a lot more. They haven't learned the art of concise writing. And so that is a helpful thing. You can also use it peer grading, so kids don't say, oh, it sounds right. I don't know if it's right. It sounds right. I'm going to give them the point. But if they physically have to highlight what they think is the correct answer, then as you go through them, you can just look at the highlights. And same with if they self-grade first and then you go through and look at the points, you can just read the highlights instead of other things to confirm if they got that correct or not. Okay, A2, the dependent variable is the amount of electricity in kilowatts that the panels provide, and that is here as well. You can see on this scoring guideline that there are only one correct answer here and one correct answer here. That it happens on some FRQ questions. Usually an FRQ question has several correct answers and they can have just one of them, but on occasion there is just one correct answer. And so this student got this one correct as well with those words. For A3, this student got this one because they faced east. Now the hypothesis didn't necessarily need to be accurate in terms of science. East and south facing, most of the time solar panels face south toward the equator, but this was just writing a hypothesis, not necessarily what would make the most sense. So this student got this correct. A4 is not correct because weather conditions is too vague. So weather conditions like being too cloudy would have given the point. And also recognize that this is just a few extra words. such as too cloudy. So it's just adding really specific words that get kids points. They don't have to write a book, but they need to be specific and they need to describe and explain with very specific, precise terms. All right, for B1, this is incorrect. The correct answer is a turbine, not a transformer. Now, when you grade students, if you have just a handful of students and you just want to cross it out and write the correct answer, you can. I have a lot of students, so I just go through and give the points, and then I go through the whole thing together as a class. I take 10 minutes or 15 minutes to go through it, and they can see what they got wrong and what the correct answer would be. When we grade on the AP test, we do not write on them at all. Okay, sorry, grade nationally, we don't write on them at all. B2 is also no points because for B2, the problem that a lot of kids forget on this question, or it seems like from a couple of student samples, is that the potential energy is really the gravity at the top gravity is going to send it down. So you can see how it's worded in B2 on the scoring guidelines and how precise they want students to be. This would be on every FRQ, some things are graded more easily and some things are graded more difficult to determine what kids can write better at a collegiate matter versus not at a collegiate matter. So B2, in my opinion, was one where they were a little bit more picky and precise to separate the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s, and the 1s and the 2s. B3 almost got it, but the problem is they didn't explain when there's a shortage. So where is this shortage coming from? And it's really from cloudy weather, from seasons. So why is there a shortage? Cloudy weather, rainy weather can hinder solar power, wind power if there's no wind. So that was needed to be talked about here, and that was an explain question. And explain, you've got to add really more details to show you truly understand. It's a process usually. Sometimes it's steps in order for explain questions. All right, now let's go on to C. Oh, and this person forgot to do B4. So this student missed a point there. Okay, so C1. The point there is that the water is drinkable, and so having a source of drinking water is an advantage. And C2, decrease in water storage. Now notice on this question that it asks for the problem with the dam. It says, explain the effect of increased silt in the reservoir on the hydroelectric power system. So I teach my students that when sediment builds up behind hydroelectric dams, it can't build wetlands below the dam. Well, that would not have been a correct answer because it's asking the problem that this creates on the hydroelectric power system, not another. So if they had just said an environmental problem, my students could have written about the lack of wetland formation downriver or nutrients in the silt as well. But it specifically asked about the hydroelectric power system. And that's another thing where kids have to really answer the question that's asked, not just another thing that is correct, but it doesn't quite answer the exact question. Let's go on to the next student sample. Oh, so this person got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. So 5 out of 10 is a decent score. If the student got all 5 out of 10s on all 3, at least, and a decent score on their multiple choice. It's in passing range according to how the FRQs were scored. Now, as of right now, as the moment I'm recording this, we don't have a score breakdown for the new exam. This is the first full test of the new exam. So in the old exams, this would be a good score, a passing score, if the student averaged this on all 3 of their FRQs. All right, let's go on to 1F, which starts, sorry, on the back side. I printed 2 sides. All right, so this one did worse. You can probably tell. This student did not get A because it's just wrong. A1's wrong, A2's wrong, A3 is wrong, and A4 is right. So even though the last person got a higher score, this person actually said, if it's rainy or always cloudy, that's what the other student sample missed. So there's 1 point there. And so when I grade it for students, sometimes I put a little +1 to indicate how many points that is. And then this person also got turbine. So this was a pretty easy, she wrote, or he wrote, or they wrote, more than they needed to on this one, because if you look at B1, it just says identify. And so you just needed to have turbine. Now, there is some question about, do students need to write in a complete sentence or not? So we have not been strict on grading that in the recent years, but in the past, if they did not put this in a complete sentence, they would not get the point. All it needs is a noun and a verb. So they could have said, it is a turbine, or it's a turbine, and that would have been fine. But in the past, just saying turbine was not. So I still make my students write in complete sentences, but in the last few years when we're grading the AP test, we do not require a complete sentence when we grade it anymore. But just in case I always make my students write in complete sentence. All right. The rest of the FRQ, I believe, does not get any more points. That's it. So this student got 2 points total on this FRQ. Again, for B2, it's not talking about gravity. For B3, it needs to talk about the rain or sun or clouds, and they implied it, but they didn't talk about it. And then for B4, the dam could overflow. Well, not really. They actually, this is not a correct answer. It's not really talking about this in the question. It's not answering the exact question. And, negatively affected by climate change. I'm sorry, I mistook this one. So dams don't really overflow. They just release the water through it. So this person, the student, is not really understanding that we actually just release, when there is flooding and lots of rain, and I have visited a hydroelectric dam on the Columbia River in Oregon, and they just release water through it to prevent it from damaging the dam, and it'll flow down to the ocean. So, and then not saying there's not enough water to push the turbine. Actually, there's a lot of water to push the turbine. So it's, she doesn't, or he doesn't, or they do not understand how an hydroelectric dam works. And the rest of them is not proving that they understand. It does not match the rubric. All right, so this person got a 2 out of 10, which is not really a good score. But you can also see here that there's a lot of things that sound pretty good, but they're really not going to give them the points. And even this person wrote more than the last person. And so when these are officially released, it's sometimes a good idea to have your students practice this as much as we did today, so that they can go through and see what got points and what did not get points on the student sample. So doing these together as a class can be a helpful experience.